He kissed me goodbye like everything was normal. But 10 minutes later I was tracking his GPS, straight to a hotel. He thought I was too pregnant, too fragile, too naive to notice. What he didn't know was that I'd already seen the late-night texts. The dual flower deliveries. The look in his eyes when he said her name instead of mine. So I showed up. 9 months pregnant. Holding our marriage certificate. And ready to end the lies with one slap. Vincent had been completely out of it today. He'd forgotten his keys twice, poured coffee into an empty sugar jar, and left his phone in the fridge. He said nothing about it, just gave me a sheepish smile, kissed the top of my head and kept moving like he was afraid standing still would give something away. It wasn't like him. Vincent Tellington was many things, calculated, charming, ambitious. But scattered was never one of them. He'd always been the steady one. The one who remembered appointment times, due dates, and even the brand of lotion I liked back when we first started dating. But lately he'd become someone else. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. We were sitting at the breakfast table when the silence finally cracked. I was the one who broke it. Did something happen? I asked softly, keeping my voice neutral. Vincent let out a long, slow sigh, like he'd been waiting for this moment and yet still dreaded it. I need to take a business trip to Lynn City, he said, not meeting my eyes. It's just for the day. I'll be back tomorrow. My fingers went still on the spoon I was using to stir my cereal. You're going today? He nodded, then hesitated. But you really shouldn't be left alone right now. Never mind. I'll send someone else. That's how he said it. With such convincing sincerity, like he was reluctantly letting go of a duty he cared about. His gaze finally lifted to meet mine, clear, open, honest. Too honest. Something about that perfect delivery made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I gave him a small smile. I'll be fine. I'll call my mom to come stay with me. You sure? I'm sure. I watched him carefully. He nodded as though relieved he didn't have to argue. That was the second red flag. Vincent had spent the last few months doting on me like a man possessed. Canceling client dinners. Skipping corporate retreats. Rubbing my feet even when he was dead tired. He once rescheduled a quarterly board meeting because my nose bled unexpectedly. So why now? Why was this trip suddenly non-negotiable? Okay then, he said, standing. Just take care of yourself. I'll be back as soon as I can. I nodded. Safe travels. He looked surprised for a second, maybe even disappointed that I didn't ask more. Then he gave me a kiss on the forehead, grabbed his laptop bag and rushed toward the door. He didn't even wait for my mother to arrive, something he'd never done once since I crossed my second trimester. That was red flag number 3. When the door shut behind him, I didn't move. I just sat there at the dining table staring at the spot where he'd been. And then I reached for my phone. The GPS tracker was already activated. The smartwatch I'd slipped into the inner pocket of his laptop bag buzzed faintly to life on the screen. A green dot began moving across the city map. Right on schedule. He'd given me that watch during the 4th month of my pregnancy, after I fainted in a department store from anemia. When I came to, he was there holding my hand like a lifeline. The watch had been his way of protecting me. Biometric readings, location tracking, emergency contacts, the whole package. Now it was my shield. I watched the dot move for a while, then leaned back and closed my eyes. I already knew where he was going. But I needed to see it for myself. It had started a year ago, long before Eloise had even been a heartbeat inside me. I remember the exact day. I had been waiting at a cafe that had just opened across from Vincent's firm. A charming place called Aroma and Ash. I'd planned to surprise him for lunch. We'd both been so busy and I missed him, missed who we used to be. I hadn't told him in advance. Figured I'd just call once I was already there. The place had an earthy charm to it. Sage green walls. Brass light fixtures. The scent of cinnamon and espresso. It was late morning and the place was only half full. I was just about to call him when he walked in. Vincent wasn't alone. There was a moment before he spotted me when I noticed how the barista straightened at the sight of him. How she gave a little wave to someone behind the counter. How a woman, elegant, slender, her hair in a loose bun, appeared from the back and smiled the moment she saw him. That was the first time I saw her. Vivian Lancaster. Vincent gave her a slight nod. She smiled and gestured toward something behind the counter. That silent exchange, the way their eyes met, the fluidity of it, it sent a strange little shiver down my spine. I brushed it off at the time. When Vincent saw me, he lit up with surprise. "Camille, what are you doing here?" "I came to have lunch with you," I said, standing to greet him. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming downstairs?" He rubbed his chest and gave a lopsided grin. "I needed to clear my head. Work's been a mess. Coffee here's really good. And they make these cookies." He turned toward the counter. "Sophie, another order of the cookies, please." Sophie. That's what he called her. But later I'd come to know her full name, Vivian Lancaster. She approached with a plate of warm cookies and a disarming smile. "On the house," she said, placing it on the table. Then she looked at me. "You must be Camille. I've heard so much about you." I smiled politely, but something twisted inside me. She didn't ask for my name. She already knew it. Vincent introduced me without hesitation. He greeted me naturally. The entire exchange was flawless, and somehow that made it worse. Back then I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being possessive, that not every woman who smiled at my husband was a threat. But then came the little things. The cookies he raved about weren't even on the menu. The cafe began sending personalized delivery baskets to his office. The receptionist started smiling too much whenever I walked in. And then one night I saw it. Vivian's name on his phone screen. Not Vivian. Not Miss Lancaster. Just Sophie. As if she needed a disguise. The message read, "If you had met me first, would you have married me?" He hadn't replied. But that didn't matter. Because I had. And that night I sat on the edge of our bed and felt something inside me begin to crack. I didn't confront him. Not then. Because I needed to know the whole truth. Now today the dot had stopped moving. I zoomed in. Oakridge Grand Hotel. Room 1212. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply leaned back on the couch and stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me. Vincent had always said he didn't want to become like his father. A man who chased shadows and forgot what he had. But somewhere along the way he had. He had someone who made him smile like I hadn't seen in months. Someone who gave him cookies not on the menu. Someone he was willing to lie for. And still he kissed me goodbye this morning like nothing was wrong. Maybe for him nothing was. I reached for my glass of milk and drank it slowly. My hand rested on my belly, feeling the faint flutter of Eloise moving inside. "She's not even born yet," I whispered, "and you already broke her home." But it wouldn't break me. Not this time. I pulled the blanket over myself, closed the GPS tracker, and stared out the window as the rain began to fall. It was 6 a.m. when I arrived at Oakridge Grand Hotel, my fingers wrapped tightly around two things. Our household registration book and our marriage certificate. Both official. Both binding. Both at one time sacred. Now they felt like paper shields against something that had already cut me open. I stood at the reception desk, my face calm but my heart pounding like a war drum. The young man behind the counter offered a trained smile. Courteous, professional, clueless. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "My husband checked in last night," I said, placing the two documents gently on the counter. "His name is Vincent Tellington. I'd like to know which room he's staying in." He blinked, caught off guard by the directness. "I'm sorry, but we can't release guest information without their permission." "I figured you'd say that." I tilted my head slightly. "Which is why I've brought these." I slid the marriage certificate forward. "And this." I opened my ID wallet to reveal our matching addresses and photo IDs. He hesitated. Shifted awkwardly. "Even so, hotel policy requires." "If you won't tell me," I cut in, my voice cool, "I'll call the police and file a report. My husband is missing, his phone is off, and I'm 9 months pregnant. Shall we go that route?" His face lost color. He glanced around nervously, then leaned forward, his voice lowered. "Please wait a moment, ma'am. I'll check for you right away." I exhaled slowly. My hand went to my belly automatically. Eloise shifted inside me, restless. Or maybe she sensed I was. 2 minutes later, the front desk attendant returned. "Room 1212, he said quietly. "Take the elevator to the 12th floor and turn right. It's at the end of the hall. Do you need assistance?" I shook my head. "I've already carried more than enough." Room 1212. I stood outside the door for 39 minutes and 17 seconds. I counted. Not because I was waiting for the right moment, but because I didn't know what else to do. I was terrified of what I'd see. And more terrified of what I already knew. The hallway was silent, the kind of silence only hotels have in early morning hours. Sterile, polished, still reeking faintly of someone else's perfume and secrets. Then the door clicked. It opened slowly without a sound. Vincent stood there, hands still on the knob, hair tousled, shirt untucked. Behind him, a pair of slender arms wrapped tightly around his waist. Vivian Lancaster. Her voice floated out, syrupy and soft. Vincent, thank you for tonight. I'll remember it for the rest of my life. She hadn't seen me yet. But he had. The moment our eyes met, the world snapped into perfect, excruciating focus. His face turned pale. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He pulled away from her arms instantly, stepping forward, panic breaking through his features. Camille. I tilted my head slightly. Where's the car? He blinked. What? The car, I repeated, my tone even. Where is it? In the parking garage. Good, I said. Let's go. I turned. He reached out instinctively, trying to steady me as I stumbled slightly from shifting my weight off the wall. Don't touch me. The words sliced sharper than I meant them to, but I didn't take them back. His hand froze midair. Vivian appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wearing a red silk slip dress that clung to her frame like sin. She stood behind Vincent, her eyes wide, not with guilt but with defiance. Miss Ravenswood, she said evenly, there's no need for dramatics. Nothing happened. Not in the way you think. I stopped walking and slowly turned around. What did you just say? There's no need to act like you've caught us doing something filthy, Vivian continued, her chin raised. Vincent and I talked. So, there was no betrayal. No affair. He stayed because it was my birthday and I had no one else. If you have a problem, take it up with him. But don't insult both of us with assumptions. She was calm. Composed. And that made me furious. My hand moved before I could think. Prick. The slap rang out across the hallway like a gunshot. Vivian stumbled sideways, one hand flying to her cheek as her mouth opened in a gasp. You hit me, she shrieked, her voice an octave higher. I said nothing. My hand was already at my side again, trembling slightly. Vivian's eyes narrowed into slits. She stepped toward Vincent, hand raised to touch his shoulder, her lips trembling in a theatrical pout. Vincent. He turned away, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that her hand fell into air. He didn't want her touch. His eyes met mine. Camille, he whispered, let's go home. My chest tightened. Home? Yes. Please. I'll explain everything. Let's just go. Vivian scoffed. You're seriously leaving with her after everything? She snapped. You said you didn't want to hurt her, but you're letting her humiliate both of us. Enough, Vincent said sharply, his voice finally finding edge. Stop talking. Her jaw dropped. Are you serious? He didn't answer. His eyes never left mine. I held his gaze for a long moment, then turned again. I didn't want to hear another word. We made it to the elevator in silence. He didn't try to touch me again. In that silence, something inside me unraveled. The moment I saw Vivian's arms around him, the intimacy, the comfort, something inside me cracked wide open. I thought I had prepared myself. I'd told myself again and again, it's just confirmation. You already know. Seeing it won't change anything. But it did. It shattered me. Because seeing it meant there was no going back. No excuse. No redemption. No maybe. Only the truth. My legs were shaking. My lower back ached. I felt the weight of Eloise pushing down, heavy and insistent. Or maybe it was my own shame that felt like pressure on my spine. When we reached the ground floor, Vincent pressed the elevator button for the parking garage. I didn't look at him. In the back of my mind, I replayed Vivian's words. There's nothing filthy between us like you think. As if emotional intimacy didn't count. As if sharing a hotel room and waking up in it was clean. As if betrayal only counted when there was physical proof. When we reached the car, Vincent rushed ahead to open the passenger door for me. I got in without a word. And for the first time since we met, he looked completely lost. The ride home was a blur. He tried once to speak, but I turned away and stared out the window. That was enough to shut him up. When we pulled into the driveway, my mother was already outside. She looked confused at first, then concerned. She didn't say anything when she saw me wobble slightly as I got out of the car. Vincent tried to help again. Don't touch me, I said quietly. My mother caught my arm instead. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She simply guided me into the house like I was glass she was afraid might break. Vincent didn't follow. And I didn't ask him to. The moment I stepped back into the house, the air felt heavier. Maybe it was the weight of silence, or maybe it was the echo of betrayal still vibrating in my chest. But something inside me collapsed the instant the front door shut. I didn't speak. I didn't look at Vincent. I just walked straight down the hall toward the guest bathroom, the only one with a door that locked properly. My body was trembling. My legs buckled twice on the way there. By the time I reached the door, I was gasping for breath. The moment the lock clicked behind me, the nausea hit. Violent. Sudden. I dropped to my knees, barely managing to lift the toilet lid before I started vomiting, over and over again. I didn't even know what was coming out of me. I hadn't eaten since last night, just milk and water. But it didn't stop. Tears streamed down my face as bile clawed its way out of my throat. My stomach heaved, cramped, turned inside out. I was dry heaving when the banging on the door began. Camille. Camille. Vincent's voice was muffled through the door, frantic and loud. Open the door. What's going on? I couldn't speak. I clutched the rim of the toilet bowl with both hands, breathing through my mouth, feeling like my insides were tearing apart. Camille, please. Open the door, talk to me, what's wrong? He was pounding now. Camille, I swear, don't scare me like this. Open the door right now. But I couldn't. I pressed my forehead against the cold tile floor. The nausea had stopped, but a sharp pain had replaced it, not just physical. It was everywhere. My chest, my back, my throat, my ribs. I wrapped my arms around my swollen belly protectively. You're okay, I whispered to Eloise even as my voice cracked. You're okay. You're okay. I wasn't. I was falling apart. By the time I finally had the strength to pull myself upright and rinse my mouth, I heard a new voice outside the door. My mother. Camille. Her voice was softer. Steady. Mom. We're here, sweetheart. Open the door. I reached out with trembling fingers and slowly unlocked it. My mother and father were standing in the hallway. Vincent stood off to the side, looking like he'd been punched in the face. His knuckles were red from banging on the door. His eyes were bloodshot. But I didn't look at him. I collapsed into my mother's arms. She held me close, cradling the back of my head like I was 5 years old again, like she was trying to protect me from the monsters under the bed. Except the monster wasn't under the bed. He was standing right there. Let's get her out of here, my father said tightly. His voice was like steel, cold and unflinching. Vincent took a step forward. Please. Mr. Ravenswood. Don't, my father snapped. Don't even try. Vincent froze. His shoulders sagged, but he said nothing more. My father wrapped my coat around me gently, then took the hospital bag I hadn't unpacked yet, as if he knew we weren't coming back. He didn't ask me any questions until we were in the car halfway back to their house. Then quietly he said, "What do you want to do?" I stared out the window for a long time, watching the blur of buildings and bare trees pass by. Then I whispered, "I want a divorce." He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was with quiet finality. Then divorce him. That night, my mother stayed up with me, holding me in bed like she used to when I was a child with a fever. She didn't say a single word about what happened. She didn't ask how or why or when. She just ran her fingers through my hair and hummed a lullaby she used to sing when I had nightmares. I didn't cry when I saw Vivian clinging to Vincent. I didn't cry when I slapped her. I didn't even cry when I told my father I wanted to end my marriage. But I cried in my mother's arms that night. And I cried like I never had before. The next morning, Vincent came to my parents' house. He brought breakfast. Wonton's my favorite. A bag of warm pastries. My usual jasmine tea. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were shadowed, his clothes rumpled, and his face pale. But he still tried to smile when my parents opened the door. "Good morning," he said softly. I brought Camille something to eat. My father didn't shake his hand. My mother didn't even nod. But they stepped aside. Vincent stepped inside cautiously, like he was afraid one wrong move would shatter the walls. He found me in the living room sitting on the couch in silence. I hadn't touched anything since waking up. "Camille," he said, holding out the bowl, "eat a little. Please." I looked at the bowl, then at him. "Sit," I said. My voice was dry. Crack. But it held authority. He sat, still holding the bowl in his lap like a child awaiting punishment. We need to talk. He nodded. Yes. Of course. I gave you a chance, I said quietly. He blinked. I thought about pretending it didn't happen. About ignoring it. About telling myself that nothing happened in that hotel room except sleep and silence. That maybe you'd been stupid but not unfaithful. Vincent's shoulders tensed. Camille. Don't interrupt me. He flinched. That night she sent you that message. If you'd met me first, would you have married me? You didn't answer. His eyes flickered. You didn't reply. But that silence said everything I needed to know. I didn't reply because I didn't feel that way. You didn't reply because you didn't want to deal with the truth, I snapped, cutting him off. Because the moment you answered, it would be real. You kept it floating, undefined, so you could stand on your precious moral high ground. I didn't cheat, he said, his voice strained. I swear to you, Camille. Nothing physical happened. It was just conversation. She was a friend. Don't, I said. Don't insult my intelligence. He looked down, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. I didn't know who you were anymore, I whispered. Not when I watched you stand in that hotel room while another woman wrapped her arms around you. Not when you looked at me and didn't even say her name. Vincent leaned forward, the bowl trembling in his hands. I messed up. I know I did. But I didn't sleep with her. I swear to you. It was her birthday. She said she was alone. She just asked me to keep her company. I thought it was harmless. Harmless. I echoed, bitter laughter bubbling up. You lied to me. You left me here, 9 months pregnant, scared and aching and completely alone, to go make another woman feel remembered on her birthday. It wasn't like that. You chose her. His face crumbled. You chose her, I repeated. And now you're here trying to offer me breakfast like it can undo everything. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. Sorry doesn't take it back. Camille, he said, setting the bowl aside. Please. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I let the lines blur. I didn't think you'd find out, and that makes me a coward. But I never meant to hurt you. I shook my head. But you did. I'll do anything. Then sign the divorce papers. His mouth fell open. Camille. Sign the papers. His hands curled into fists. You're not even going to give me a chance to fix this? I gave you all my chances, I said. And you spent them with her. He looked at me like he couldn't breathe. But our daughter. She's the only reason I'm still standing. He opened his mouth again. But this time I stood up. And I walked away. Vincent came back the next day. He didn't call in advance. He just showed up, same dark circles under his eyes, same pathetic plastic bag filled with store-bought pastries he thought would make a difference. As if sugar could undo betrayal. He stood awkwardly in the living room while my parents stared at him with stone faces. They didn't ask him to leave, not yet. They wanted to see what I would do. I sat in the armchair beside the fireplace, curled around a mug of warm water, wearing the oversized maternity sweater my mom had knit for me last winter. The one Vincent used to tease me about because it made me look like a walking marshmallow. I didn't feel like a marshmallow now. I felt like steel. Camille, he said quietly, stepping forward. I need to explain. You already did, I said, cutting him off. Please, he begged, just let me talk. You have to understand. Nothing happened between Vivian and me. That night, yes, I was with her. I was stupid. But we didn't do anything. We didn't cross any lines. We just talked. I looked at him. Talked. He nodded quickly. It was her birthday. She didn't have anyone in the city. She said she didn't want to be alone. I only stayed to keep her company. That's it. I swear to you, Camille. Nothing physical happened. You keep saying that like it's supposed to comfort me, I said. Like the absence of sex makes everything else acceptable. He flinched. I didn't mean it like that. But that's what you're clinging to, isn't it? That thin technicality. That you didn't sleep with her. He stepped closer. I made a mistake, Camille. I let things get too close. I blurred the lines. But I didn't betray you. You didn't betray me? I echoed, setting the mug down slowly. Then let me walk you through what betrayal looks like, Vincent. His mouth opened. But he said nothing. You missed the 40-week ultrasound appointment, I said. Do you remember that day? He nodded stiffly. You said it was just a routine scan. It was the first time we would have seen Eloise's face. He looked down. I called the clinic and asked if I could reschedule. Do you know what they said? He didn't answer. They said you had canceled my appointment. Not rescheduled it. Canceled. That's not true. Then explain why they had a note saying, "Father unavailable due to client conflict," written under my file? He swallowed. You said you had an important meeting that day. You wore your navy suit. You left before sunrise. I leaned forward slightly. But I know now that you weren't at a meeting. You were hiking. With her. Vincent paled. You brought her snacks. Carried coffee in a thermos for her. You took pictures of the view. And not once did you check your phone to see if I was okay. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I cut in sharply. Because if you checked you would have seen the messages. The ones I sent asking if you were still coming. The ones I sent sitting outside the ultrasound room waiting alone. He opened his mouth to speak again but I kept going. You sent 2 bouquets every day, I said. 1 to our home. 1 to the cafe. I was just being polite. On Valentine's Day, you sent her 19 roses. He froze. I found the receipt in your briefcase, Vincent. You sent her 19. You brought me 12. And you lied. You said the florist had run out. His face crumbled. She gave you a pair of cufflinks for your birthday, I continued. You wore them to our dinner. When I asked where you got them, you said your assistant picked them out. You didn't even blink when you lied. That night meant nothing. I watched her whisper to you across the restaurant, I said bitterly. She asked if she was the first to wish you a happy birthday. You said yes. He blinked rapidly. Camille, how do you? Because I was there, Vincent, I said. I went back. I saw her outside the hotel that night holding a bouquet. I asked the waitress where your boss went and she said, "Oh, she just left with her boyfriend. It's her birthday today." He looked stricken. You were following me? No, I said calmly. I was surviving you. His shoulders sagged. You said your shoulder hurt. That you'd been working too much. You smelled like ointment for weeks. I asked where you got it and you said you picked it up from the pharmacy. I narrowed my eyes. But it wasn't from the pharmacy, was it? Vincent's voice was a whisper. No. She got it for you from the hospital. She rubbed it into your skin. You let her. He shook his head. Camille. You voice chatted with her for 27 minutes on your way home every night, I said. That's 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. Do you even remember the last time you spoke that many words to me in one day? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The man she spoke to? The version of you she knew. I paused. That was the Vincent I fell in love with in college. The one who used to tell me every stupid little thought in his head. The one who was cheerful, spontaneous, a little ridiculous. I looked away. But that version hasn't been mine in a long time. Silence. Then I said the one thing I'd never admitted aloud until now. I tried to pretend. Vincent lifted his head slightly. I tried to pretend none of it mattered. That you were just being polite. That it was innocent. That I was overreacting. Camille. I told myself I was hormonal. I told myself I was insecure. I told myself I had no proof. My voice was rising now. And in doing that, Vincent, I betrayed myself. He shook his head. Don't say that. I hated myself for it, I said quietly. For being so desperate to keep you, I almost lost myself. Camille, please. I want a divorce. The words were calm, flat, final. He flinched. You don't mean that. I do. He stepped forward. Camille, please. I know I messed up. But I love you. I love our child. I'll stop seeing her. I'll delete her number. I'll do anything. I'll cut all ties. Just don't leave. You already left, I said. You just never had the courage to admit it. I made a mistake, he pleaded. A terrible one. But don't destroy our family over this. You said nothing physical happened would hurt worse than something that did. I didn't touch her. I didn't sleep with her. You might as well have, I replied. He looked like I'd struck him. I told you before, I said. It wasn't about sex. It was about intimacy. You gave her the pieces of you that used to belong to me. You let her into our world. Into your heart. Into your thoughts. His lips parted, but he couldn't argue. And now, I whispered. I don't want them back. He stood there, shoulders slumped, face drained of color. For the first time I felt nothing. No hatred. No rage. Not even grief. Just distance. An enormous, permanent canyon that neither of us could cross again. I'll have the papers sent to your office, I said. Sign them. Camille. I didn't answer. I just walked away. I don't remember what I was holding, maybe the mug, maybe the bag of pastries Vincent had brought, but I remember the moment it all snapped. The noise of it hitting the floor wasn't loud. Just a soft thud, a shatter, a slow spill of soup that soaked into the carpet like the last of my patience bleeding out. Vincent was mid-sentence, still trying to explain for the 100th time that nothing happened. That his mistake didn't qualify as betrayal. That his intentions were good. That his conscience was clear. I brought you this, he said, lifting the container of congee. It's warm. You should eat something. I slapped it off the table. The lid cracked. The congee splattered across his chest and down his shirt like molten shame. Some of it hit the floor. Some of it hit his wrist. He flinched, stepped back. And then the mask dropped. His voice rose, sharp and loud. What more do you want from me? I stood still. He was breathing hard now. I've already admitted I was wrong. I've apologized. I told you I'd never see her again. I told you it wouldn't happen again. I told you I'll sign whatever you want. Why do you keep punishing me like this? What do you want, Camille? What do you want? I looked him straight in the eye, my voice soft, deadly still. I want you to stop disgusting me. Silence. It cut through the room like a knife. He blinked once. Then again. And then I saw something in his face I hadn't seen before. Not regret, not sadness, not love. Defeat. And then I collapsed. Everything after that was chaos. I remember the floor rushing toward me. The way my mother screamed. The sound of my father's footsteps pounding down the hall. Vincent shouting my name. Over and over. And then black. When I woke up, everything felt distant. My mouth was dry. My chest ached. My abdomen burned like fire. My body was weak, drained of all strength. A machine beeped steadily near my ear. The ceiling light above me was dimmed, casting long shadows across the hospital room. I turned my head slowly. My mother sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly, her face pale but composed. You're awake, she whispered, reaching for my hand. Don't move too much. My throat rasped. The baby? She's okay, she said. You both are. The doctors performed an emergency C-section. You lost a lot of blood, but they managed to stabilize you. Eloise is in neonatal care. She's healthy. A little small but strong. I closed my eyes, relief and pain battling for dominance in my chest. I was alive. And so was she. Just then I heard another voice. Familiar. Soft. Carefully gentle. Camille, my poor girl. I opened my eyes again. Catherine Tellington was standing by the door. Vincent's mother. Her designer coat hung on her shoulders like it belonged in a catalog, but her face was swollen from crying. She looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her. She crossed the room quickly and took my hand before I could pull it away. Thank you for everything you've been through, she said, tears springing to her eyes. Why didn't you call me when something so serious happened? I would have flown back sooner. I didn't have the energy to speak. She smiled, then her voice softened to a whisper. Vincent's learned his lesson. He's outside. He hasn't slept. He's been sitting in the stairwell crying his eyes out. I've never seen him like this. She tried to stroke my hair. But before she could say another word, my mother stood. And in a voice as cold as winter steel, she said, Mrs. Tellington, if you really care about my daughter, then please do her the only kindness left. Catherine blinked. Of course, anything. Tell your son to sign the divorce papers, my mother said. Silence. Catherine's hand slowly dropped from mine. She straightened, clearly shaken. We shouldn't interfere too much, she said gently. They're still young. Young couples always have arguments. My mother said nothing. Just stared at her. Catherine continued, desperate. Vincent made a mistake. A terrible one. But in marriage, even your teeth bite your tongue sometimes. That doesn't mean you pull them out. And now that the baby's here, she added, voice softening, can't we think of the child at least? I closed my eyes. She kept talking. Rambling. Justifying. Trying to sound kind while making me the unreasonable one. But I heard none of it. Because in that moment I understood something deeply, painfully true. When it came down to it, every mother stood on her own child's side. No matter how sweetly she smiled, no matter how much she once cared for me, she would always choose her son. Even when he was wrong. Especially then. Vincent didn't try to see me. Not directly. But he waited outside my hospital room every day. Sometimes I caught his reflection in the hallway mirror when the door creaked open. Sitting slouched on a bench. His hands clasped together. Staring at the floor like it held answers. My father refused to let him in. He didn't protest. He just sat. Day after day. Sometimes for hours. One day he stopped my mother in the hall and quietly asked if he could at least see Eloise. She looked torn. I don't know what changed her mind. Maybe compassion, maybe exhaustion. But she carried Eloise out to him one morning while I was asleep. I pretended not to know. I heard the nurse mention it later in passing. That the baby had been wheeled briefly down the corridor. That someone had seen a man holding her like glass, tears dripping onto her hospital blanket. But I never asked. Because even if I let him hold her, I wasn't going to let him hold me. Catherine flew back to her estate the next evening. Vincent stopped visiting the hospital after a week. I thought it might bring me peace. But all I felt was silence. And in that silence I began to feel something unexpected. Power. They say strength is loud. Fierce. Full of fire. But mine was quiet. It looked like choosing to sleep with my back to the door. It sounded like silence when Vincent's name appeared on my phone screen and I didn't answer. It felt like stillness when Eloise cried in the middle of the night and I held her alone. Just me and her, heartbeat to heartbeat. She didn't need him to survive. And neither did I. I was sipping lukewarm tea, going through Eloise's vaccination schedule on my tablet when the phone rang. Catherine Tellington. Her name blinking across the screen felt like a ghost tapping gently on glass. Quiet but impossible to ignore. I considered letting it go to voicemail. I even hovered my finger above the red button. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe closure, made me answer. Camille, she said, her voice brittle with a forced calm. Can we talk? It wasn't a question. The Tellington estate looked the same. Too perfect. Trimmed hedges, manicured roses, and silence that weighed more than peace ever should. I stepped inside. The housekeeper took my coat like muscle memory, offering a sympathetic smile. I didn't return it. Catherine waited in the drawing room, perched on the edge of a velvet chair, her hands clenched tightly around a teacup that hadn't been touched. She didn't stand when I walked in. Thank you for coming, she murmured. I gave a polite nod and sat across from her. The table between us had always been metaphorical. Today it was real. I'm not sure how to start this, she said after a beat. Then start honestly, I replied. Her shoulders sagged and that was when I noticed. The pearls around her neck were uneven. Catherine Tellington never wore anything uneven. My marriage, she said quietly, is over. My stomach didn't drop. My pulse didn't spike. It was a statement I'd expected to hear one day. So I let her speak. Harold is filing for divorce, she continued. He's leaving me, for a woman 2 years younger than Vincent. There was the family legacy unfolding like a cursed script. I gave that man 40 years, Catherine whispered. 40 years of my life. And now I'm just... She stopped. Her mouth opened then closed. I didn't rush her. I waited. Finally her voice cracked. You understand me, don't you? It was a plea dressed in fragile dignity. But I didn't lean forward. I didn't take her hand. I simply looked at her. This woman who once told me marriage was sacrifice, who warned me that some men just stray and it was a wife's job to endure. I met her eyes and answered softly, get some rest. I should go. I stood. Catherine looked like she might reach for me but she didn't. There was nothing left to say. The air outside was crisp, the early spring chill brushing against my cheeks. I walked down the stone path without hurry. And then I heard him. Camille. His voice hadn't changed. Still deep, still hesitant. Still aching like an apology no one asked for. I didn't turn. Camille, please, Vincent said again, louder now. Can we just talk? I stopped at the gate. Then slowly I faced him. He looked tired. Not just from sleepless nights, though those were there too, but from the weight of consequences finally catching up to him. I didn't say hello. You came to see my mother? He asked. She invited me. He exhaled like he'd been holding it in for months. I didn't know she was going to do that, he said as if it mattered. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I tilted my head and asked the first question. If your father just had a close female friend, would you still feel for him? Or for your mom? Vincent froze. You know the answer, I said. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. And, I continued, why do you think he chose now to ask for a divorce? Vincent looked at me then, truly looked. As if seeing someone he once loved but never truly knew. I waited. But he said nothing. His silence was louder than any excuse he could have offered. I gave a small nod, not of understanding but of finality. Then I turned, unlatched the gate and walked away. Back home Eloise was napping. I stood by the window, watching her tiny chest rise and fall with perfect rhythm. For years, I had twisted myself into knots to make sense of Vincent's affection, trying to fit myself into the narrow lanes of his loyalty, mistaking his indifference for absence instead of choice. But today something shifted. Watching Catherine unravel in that cold, gilded room, I saw my future, or rather the one I had narrowly escaped. She had stayed, had endured, and in the end, was discarded like a faded heirloom. And there I was, standing on the other side of the glass, holding clarity like a warm cup of tea. No rage. No gloating. Just peace. A woman he could no longer reach. I had already moved back into my parents' house by the time I filed the papers. Their guest room was small, quiet, and overlooked my mother's garden. Every morning, Eloise would babble at the sparrows outside the window, completely unaware of the storm that had just passed through her mother's life. I thought I'd feel relief the moment the divorce papers were signed. But as I sat across from my lawyer, pen poised in hand, it wasn't relief I felt. It was clarity. This is your formal petition, Ms. Delaney said, sliding the file toward me. Her voice was calm, professional. But just so you're aware, Camille, unless Mr. Tellington cooperates, the divorce can't be granted without a prolonged legal process. I'm aware, I said, signing my name in smooth strokes. But I'm not waiting anymore. He lost the right to delay my peace. She gave me a small, sympathetic nod. I'll have this submitted to the court today. When I stepped out of the office into the late afternoon sun, I didn't look back. The first few days passed quietly. My mother filled the kitchen with the smell of cinnamon tea and roasted almonds. My father pretended not to glance over the top of his newspaper when I came downstairs in the morning, holding Eloise on my hip. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We didn't need to. Everyone in town had heard the whispers by now. Vivian Lancaster's name was synonymous with disgrace. Vincent's reputation wasn't faring much better. By the fourth day, I heard through an old contact that Vincent had received the summons. By the fifth, word got around that he'd thrown a whiskey tumbler against the wall of his office. Shattered it. Yelled at two junior partners. Locked himself in for hours. By the seventh, board members at Stratus Media were quietly discussing temporary leadership restructuring. Shareholders weren't thrilled that the man managing millions couldn't keep his own marriage from falling apart. Day 16. I was rocking Eloise in the backyard when my phone buzzed with a message from Ms. Delaney. Vincent Tellington has requested a meeting. He says he wants to talk face-to-face one last time. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed a reply. Public place. 30 minutes. No promises. We met on a bench in the park near the courthouse. It was the same park where we once discussed baby names. Back then he had brought a thermos of coffee and held my hand through the entire list. I had loved him then. I really had. But now he looked like a man unraveling. The tailored coat he wore didn't mask the slump in his shoulders. His hair looked a bit unkempt, like he hadn't been sleeping well. Good. He was already sitting when I arrived, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight. I didn't rush toward him. I took my time, savoring every step on the gravel path like it belonged to me and only me. He stood when I reached the bench. Camille. Vincent. I sat. He did too. For a moment neither of us spoke. The rustle of leaves overhead filled the silence. Then he said, I messed up every single thing I did. Yes, you did. I said simply. He exhaled sharply. It wasn't an affair. I never slept with Vivian. Enough, I said, eyebrows raised. Not again. He looked like I had slapped him. I continued, voice unshaken. You made her your confidant. You let her laugh at my expense. You shared things with her you hadn't said to me in years. You defended her before you defended your own wife. Tears welled up in his eyes. You want me to be grateful you didn't take it further? Is that it? I asked. He shook his head. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't. No, I interrupted. You don't get to didn't mean to me. I gave you chances. I gave you the truth. You gave me lies and silence. He reached out like he might touch my hand, but I pulled away. When I realized you had feelings for her, I said slowly, that's when I truly hated you. He broke. Tears ran down his face, and for the first time I didn't feel the urge to comfort him. I felt nothing. He was crying on a bench in a public park. And all I could think about was how much better my life had become without him in it. I made a mistake, he whispered. I thought I was just being kind to her, but I think I cared for her. And I was too much of a coward to admit it to myself. No, you knew, I said, steel returning to my voice. You knew, and you hoped I'd never notice. He sniffed. I lost everything. No, I corrected. You gave everything away. All I did was finally stop chasing after the pieces. He leaned back, breathing hard like the weight of it had finally landed. I stood. He looked up at me. Please don't do this, he whispered. I met his gaze. Finalize the divorce. He signed 3 days later. Everything, aside from the company, was handed over without a fight. The house, the cars, the shared investments, even the lake cabin I never liked. I didn't want his empire. I wanted my peace. And I got it. The weeks that followed felt like a long exhaled breath. My parents helped me renovate a small office space in town. I returned to work on my own terms, building a boutique consultancy firm one quiet step at a time. Mia started helping with Eloise more regularly, filling our home with laughter, snacks, and terrible reality shows. I watched my daughter grow soft and chubby and bright. She laughed in her sleep and babbled when birds flew by the window. She made silly faces when I brushed her hair. Every day she reminded me what it meant to love without fear. Vincent's life? It unraveled. Stratus Media lost 2 high-profile clients. Board members began to question his leadership. His name, once respected, was now associated with betrayal, scandal, and emotional negligence. His mother blamed him publicly. His father quietly left for Europe. Vincent Tellington, once the golden boy of corporate law, was now a cautionary tale. One evening, Vivian Lancaster sent an email through my assistant. A formal apology, full of flowery language and false humility. She asked to meet. She said she hoped we could close the chapter with grace. I deleted it. Then a week later she showed up at my office unannounced. She was thinner, paler, and looked like someone who had finally tasted her own poison. She stood in the hallway like a ghost from another life. I just want to say I'm sorry, she murmured. For everything. I studied her face. You want relief, I said. Not forgiveness. She blinked. I'm not here to ease your guilt. And I turned my back. I chose not to think about them anymore. Not Vincent. Not Vivian. Not the girl I used to be when I begged for someone to choose me. One morning, months later, I stood in the kitchen with the sun pouring through the window. Eloise sat in her high chair, Clover curled at her feet, and Mia danced to some ridiculous 80s playlist in the background. I was stirring a pot of oatmeal when I caught my reflection in the glass. No anger. No grief. No cracks. Just a woman at peace. A failed marriage may hurt for a while, but it will never define me for a lifetime. The end.